Welcome to another episode of Danielle Smith Uncensored. I'm Derek Fildebrand, publisher of the Western Standard. Very pleased you could all join us. Thanks for coming, Danielle.
You're cutting in and out there a little bit, Derek. Did you want to announce the sponsor and then I can just take it away?
Yeah, I'll cue it up from there. Well, first, I just want to remind everyone, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, please consider supporting bailout-free media. Western Standard, we're right now actually working aggressively to expand into British Columbia. The Western Standard is going to get more Western still. So if you want to support what we're doing, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Sign up and try it free for 15 days and see if you like what we have to offer. Today's sponsor is Kyron's Way. Kyron's Way is a natural and holistic treatment program based in Calgary, Alberta, to help you deal with stress and anxiety, a lot of the kind of things that plague a lot of people a lot of the time, but especially right now while we're in forced semi-lockdowns. So check out kyronsway.com for more information. I'm very excited about today's show. We've got the Liberty Caucus. We've got Randy Hillier, independent MPP from Ontario, Drew Barnes, my former colleague from the United Conservative Party, formerly of the Wild Rose, Paul Hinman, leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party, and interim leader, and Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party. Really happy to have you all here. Very grateful. Danielle, why don't you take it away?
You bet I will. Thank you once again, Derek, for giving me the opportunity to have this platform. As you know, and I'd mentioned this before when we first started doing these, there were a number of guests and topics that I was not permitted to interview on mainstream media. One of them is Randy Hillier. When he started up the Liberty Caucus, I paid close attention to what was going on there. I was delighted to see it expand. I'm a bit dismayed to see that it's not 10 times larger, because it really should be. If we are doing our job as voters, electing and properly vetting politicians, we should have far more politicians who believe in liberty and freedom if we're going to get to a place where we're back to not a new normal, but life as the old normal. So I want to start, and I'll tell you the order that we'll go in. We're going to talk to Randy Hillier from Ontario to get his perspective of what life looks like there. Then we'll go to Maxime Bernier, and he'll give us sort of a dual perspective of what's going on in Quebec, as well as comment on the federal scene. Then we'll come back to Alberta and get a perspective from Paul Hinman. He was the first Alberta politician to join in the Liberty Caucus. And then, of course, Drew Barnes and Angela Pitt joined very quickly, I think about a week after that. And we'll end up with Drew and hopefully get an update on the direction that the government is going. But why don't we begin by talking with Randy Hillier? He and I have a bit of a history. When I was doing property rights advocacy back in the 90s, he started up a group called the Lanark Landowners Association. So he has been a property rights advocate for his entire career. Of course, got elected to the Ontario legislature and has been stirring up a little bit of trouble ever since. Glad to hear it. But Randy, why don't we begin? And perhaps you can tell us, first of all, why it is you decided to start the Liberty Caucus.
Well, it's a pleasure to join you, Danielle, on the Western Standard. And we do have a little bit of history. And I've always enjoyed your thoughtful conversations and discussions. So, listen, we started the End of Lockdown Caucus about just over a month ago. I called up Maxime Bernier and Derek Sloan and a few other individuals, and five of us decided that we should join up in a nonpartisan, non-affiliated way on a neutral, hosted with a neutral platform called the Liberty Coalition Canada. And, you know, it was very evident to myself, Danielle, and I'm sure to you and others, that all political parties and all political leaders during COVID have actually betrayed the public, and they've surrendered their elected offices to public health bureaucrats and other so-called experts. They really have abdicated their responsibilities altogether. And I know that there was a number of elected representatives at all levels, local, municipal, provincial, and federal, that have different views, but they were constrained and precluded from having an opportunity to speak. So that's what the End of the Lockdown Caucus is a forum. It brings together those elected representatives who aren't timid and who aren't cowardly and who want to discharge the duties of their office properly. I would say that what we have is a group of statesmen rather than just pawns who have come together in the End of Lockdown Caucus. And we understand that somebody must defend freedom. Somebody must defend the rule of law. Somebody must defend our democracy and justice. And if not us, then who? And really, that was the of the lockdown. We started with 5. We're up over 60. I would like to say to agree with you that it should be 10 times that number. We also understand there's a great deal of suppression, a great deal of discipline, a great deal of public shaming for those people who stand up and are counted and who dissent with the lockdown. So I'm confident that this will continue to grow. People will see that the facts and the evidence that we bring forward will demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the lockdowns cause more harm than good, significantly more harm than good. And I think also, I should just say, for the people out west, Ontario is in a very confused state with our lockdowns. Here in Ontario, although we have about the same mortality as we have had every year with seasonal respiratory viruses, which is similar across the country, and we have fewer people in hospital than we usually do. And that's mostly because we're not providing the proper medical attention to people, and people are too fearful to go to hospitals. But we have 36 different public health units in Ontario. Each of them can have up to 5 different color-coded restrictions, from yellow, green, orange, red, and gray is the progression of greater restrictions. But none of those color-coded frameworks are what we would call normal. All of them have greater restrictions or some level of restrictions more than normal. But to further complicate things, every health unit is permitted to put in additional specific or unique restrictions in each of the health unit areas. So it's very difficult to describe what the restrictions are in Ontario, but they
No
go
kidding. Randy, let me just pause you for a second, because someone thinks it's my mic that's giving you some feedback, but it might either be Drew or Maxime's. If you guys can just go on mute while we're hearing Randy, because he's got a speakerphone, and I think it's disrupting some of his coverage. Although someone else tells me here that I guess in rural Ontario, internet is horrible, so that might be part of the issue that we're facing. I'll go on mute if you guys do too. But Randy, I understand that you can't tell us the difference across the entire spectrum of what's happening in Ontario, but tell us what your day-to-day life is like. Just give us some flavor of the type of restrictions that you're still experiencing.
Well, I don't abide by all the restrictions, Danielle. So, but I would say for many people, masks are mandatory pretty much everywhere. Many restaurants are not allowed to be open, or are only allowed to be open for takeout. Many of the retail shops have restrictions. If they're allowed to be open, in the gray zone, they're not allowed to be open at all. Otherwise, they will have a restriction of 1 or 2 people in the store at a time. This, of course, does not apply to the big box stores. And we're also having quite a number of places are still under stay-at-home orders. And you are expected to stay at home unless you have essential business outside. And of course, for anybody returning from overseas, you have the COVID Hilton waiting for you at the Pearson Airport as well. I've lost you,
Danielle. I think you're on mute.
Let me try that again. Did we end up? There's Randy. What about your gyms? Gyms are a pretty big issue here. We actually have AHS inspectors that are targeting some of the small guys and literally monitoring whether somebody is breathing and working out too hard. So that's one of the more bananas restrictions that we have here. What's the situation there?
Similar here, many of the gyms have significant, if they're permitted to be open. Again, if you're in the gray zone, you're not permitted to be open at all. However, otherwise you may have a limit of 5 or 10 in the gym, various depending on the color code. But it's also, what we're seeing here, Danielle, is Ministry of Labor and Public Health and police officers going and visiting every small business and checking on them to see if they're in compliance with these public health orders. And it really has become, everybody has to look over their shoulders because it really is akin to a police state. Not only if the police may come in, knock on your door and check if you have a mask on or if you have the alcohol sanitizer or whatever other requirement, but also we've built up a very callous and very disturbing culture of snitching on one another as well, where people are cautious about being seen together with too many people or people outside of their family for fear of a neighbor calling on them and being subjected to fines.
Randy, let's go on and let me put you on pause. We'll get you back into the full conversation. I want to do a bit of a check-in on what's happening in other parts of the country. If you can go on mute, we'll move on over to Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada. And Maxime, tell us why it is you decided to join with Randy Hillier to create the Liberty Caucus.
Yeah, Danielle, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight. And that was an honor when Randy called me and asked me to be part of that Liberty Caucus because I did a video and I was I spoke a lot about ending the lockdowns here in Quebec and all across the country. And specifically in Quebec, as you know, we have a curfew. So from 9:30 at night until 5 a.m., you cannot be out there. The last time we had that in Quebec was during the FLQ crisis in the middle of the 1970s. So it's draconian measures. And I'm fighting for freedom, and that's part of our platform at the People's Party of Canada. We are the only party at the federal level that is against lockdowns, and so for me it was very easy to be part of that caucus, and I'm very happy. But the most important is to give other elected representatives at the federal, provincial, or municipal levels here in Quebec or all across the country to speak out and to be part of that caucus. I think the more people will be, the better it will be. So we need to have the courage of our conviction and to speak. It's not normal that in Quebec we don't have an official opposition that is speaking against these unconstitutional lockdowns. And same thing in Ottawa, the Conservative Party of Canada is not speaking against that. And so we have to be out there. And our goal at the end is to change the public opinion, because we know that politicians are governing by polling, by survey, by focus group, and they scared a lot of people in the beginning of that crisis. And now, people are still supporting these governments who are imposing to us lockdowns and violating our freedom. So we need to be out there to explain that. And at the end, there's another way to fight that virus, that lockdowns and curfew and ending our freedom. And so that's why, for me, it was so important to be part of these Liberty Caucus.
I'm monitoring the comments here. Someone says Quebec has a frickin' curfew. So explain a little bit about how that works, because you got caught up in the curfew yourself, right?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. My own example. I was actually, when we had that meeting in Toronto with Randy and Derek and others to create the End the Lockdowns Caucus. I was there. I took a flight and I was flying back to Montreal at 8 o'clock from Toronto. I arrived around 9:30 in Montreal at the Montreal Trudeau Airport. And so I took my car to drive to my home. It was about 10 o'clock at night and I've been arrested. and a policeman came to me and said, "What are you doing? You don't have the right to be on the road. It's 10 o'clock at night." So I had to show him my boarding pass and telling him that I was coming from the airport and I was in Toronto today, and showing my boarding pass. And he said, "Where are you leaving?" And I have to show him my license. And he said, "Okay, I will follow you up to your home until you get to your home. And I want to be sure that you're going there." So, I was amazed about that, but that's the reality in Quebec right now.
Talk to me a little bit more about the kind of restrictions that you have, because we get bits and pieces here about the different zones that you're in, and so I know it can be a bit confusing. I'm assuming Montreal is probably the most restriction. So what is life like there?
Yeah, in Montreal, first of all, you can go at a restaurant. You have to take out, and so the restaurants are closed for a long time now. You cannot go at a gym. The gym are supposed to be open this Friday, but with a lot of restrictions, and you have to reserve. And so it would be very difficult for the owner of the gyms to be profitable at the end. You cannot go to the cinema. You cannot go to the theater. You cannot. If you're living in Montreal right now, it's not Montreal that you're supposed to know, with the vibrant life and nightlife, and there's nothing, and it's a little bit depressing. So they're supposed to reopen a little bit, but I'm skeptical about that, and we'll see. But up to now, I was running this afternoon outside in Montreal, and I saw people that were walking their dog with a mask outside. It's sad. People are scared because of the propaganda coming from the government, and we don't have the opposite point of view. It's very difficult for us, Randy, myself, to be in the mainstream media, but there's a lot of medical experts that are challenging what these government are doing to our freedom. But it's difficult to be in the mainstream media, and there's only one point of view. So it's not Montreal right now. If you want to come and visit Montreal, that's not the time.
Thanks for the warning. I was thinking about it. I think I might want to learn French, but maybe now's not the time to go and have the immersion experience. I'll wait for another day, another time. Let's bring it over to Alberta, because I think I'm experiencing much of what Maxime Bernier and also Randy Hillier talked about. Is there doesn't seem to be the full, robust, cross the spectrum discussion about whether these measures are appropriate, whether they work. I know that we've got a few more political voices, so we've got a voice in opposition as well as a voice in government who have both spoken up. Let's start with Paul Hinman first, and same question to you, Paul. Why did you join the Liberty Caucus? Oh, we got you on mute there, Paul, if you want to unmute.
Sorry about that. The most important thing that we have as citizens is our freedom, and countries are brought together, and constitutions are written in a way to protect the life, the freedoms, the property, and the pursuit of happiness of individuals. And we've got a premier who continually stands up, and what he's busy protecting is the integrity of a faulty healthcare system. And he puts all Albertans, to the back burner and say, well, we've got to protect this healthcare system, when he's done nothing, even in this last year, to create a more robust and capability of treating people. And this is just the right thing to do. And any time that freedoms are being lost, if we don't step forward and protect those freedoms, other people's freedoms, it's ours that's going to be impacted eventually. And freedom, it's just, I'm sorry, Danielle, but this is what we have to fight for. And you look at World War I and World War II and the fight that we've had in Asia and stuff, it's always about freedom. And tyrants and those individuals, those totalitarians, the authoritarians, they want to strip it away from us. And again, we have a government that seems to think that they have a better idea on how to look after our health, our wellness, our safety. And again, it's not about allowing people to get the information and make the personal risk. That this is a tyrannical government that is literally stripping away our freedoms and telling us that we don't know how to assess our risk or how to carry on our lives. And I've met too many business people, whether they're restaurant owners, whether they're hairdressers, the gym owners, their business and their life has been destroyed. And the number of, family domestic violence and just the problems. There's no question, it's been over and over. The lockdowns are causing more harm than the virus, and it's just wrong. And I'm so grateful for Randy for starting this up. If I hadn't been exposed to politicians and that lifestyle, I would have had hurt feelings he didn't call me in that first 5.
Thanks for that, Paul. Talk to me a little bit more, though, because we often hear the Premier say, and I can quote his lines. He says, "Oh no, we are balancing lives and livelihoods, and we have some of the least amount of restrictions of any jurisdiction in Canada. And we've had more businesses that have been able to seamlessly operate since the beginning of this than anywhere else in Canada." You're seeing it a little bit differently. Why is that? If we do, I saw that we've got someone from Peterborough and we've got others watching from the rest of the country. Put your perspective on what the Premier says. Why do you think he's not telling the whole story?
Well, I got to start off with what I find most disgusting and wrong with that is when he starts to talk about balance every day. And it's not that these aren't insignificant. We hear about the impact of COVID, but he doesn't talk about suicides. He doesn't talk about domestic violence. He doesn't talk about bankruptcies. None of those things count. It's only the fear mongering that COVID is causing all the grief and all the pain in the world. He's not balancing anything. What he's trying to do is to bump his numbers up for a higher approval rating. He's looked at other provinces and they've clamped down and approval rating's gone up. And so to me, he's made a purely political decision. Oh, what have I got to do? Everybody else is having higher approval ratings. I'm going to clamp down. I mean, it was how many days after he promised and apologized for shutting down and picking and choosing businesses that are essential and those that aren't. I'm sorry, but what you talk, every business is essential to that person who owns it. You can't balance that. The worst thing that I've run into, Danielle, is I met a young mother who lost her 16-year-old son last September because he was so discouraged and decimated that he couldn't go back to school. And where we're doing the most harm and the most damage is with our children. What we've done to them is it's worse than telling them that the monster lives in the closet, it's going to come out and get you at night. That this fear-mongering that we've instilled on our children, it's so insidious and wrong. It's upsetting.
Okay, let me then go to Drew Barnes. I know it might be a little bit difficult to hear that kind of criticism of your government and your leader, but I must tell you that we have seen, I'm not sure whose background noise I'm hearing right now. I don't think it's mine, but if Paul, if you can go on mute, that'd be great. So Drew, I guess here's the question. We were supposed to move to step 3 in Alberta. Now, Alberta's taken a different approach for those of you outside of Alberta, where we ostensibly had some data that we had to reach certain targets and then we would see an easing of restrictions. This first target was 600 in hospital. We could move to step 1. We did. Second target was 450 people in hospital. We were moved to step 2. There was a delay, but we did. Step 3 was supposed to be 300 in hospital. And I didn't see the update today, but I thought the latest numbers were 280 in hospital. But because there's been a slight reversal, and we're hearing more about variants. I guess there's a mutant double variant in India that we're told we have to be fearful of now. That is being used as a justification not to move to step 3. So we're still in a situation where restaurants are open, but only family groups are allowed to sit at a table, maximum of 6 people at the table. Retail is only allowed to operate at 25%. We've already mentioned gyms that they're sending out officers to measure how much huffing and puffing is going on. Obviously, none of the theaters are open. None of the major event centers are open. Can't do in-person conferences. Can't have banquets. All of these things were supposed to be in step 3 once we met the 300 person in hospital target. And we were just told, nope, not going to do it with no real timeline for when we are going to do it. So Drew, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and I know that you're a bit frustrated and you're pushing from within, but can you explain what happened? Why didn't we follow the original plan?
Well, thank you for this tonight, Danielle, and colleagues in the Liberty Caucus. As best I can, there was a qualifier on opening to step 3, and that qualifier was as long as hospitalizations are not increasing. And that's the justification that's been used for not allowing us into step 3. Now, Danielle, because we're in the 13th month of this, because there's so much fatigue, because we're dealing with so many other issues in addition to COVID, many Albertans didn't hear the qualifier of the hospitalizations had to be declining. They were solely focused on the number of hospital beds. And like when step 2 didn't happen, remember, it was delayed for a week or 10 days. The pushback, the frustration, my concerns for continued compliance, the number of people, like it's in the hundreds that reach out to my office, and this is a tough time. But it's also a little bit back to why I joined the Liberty Caucus. You know, in Cypress Medicine Hat, we are not only dealing with a COVID crisis, but we're dealing with a mental health crisis. We're dealing with an addictions crisis, an economic crisis. There's a lot of things that families in our community is dealing with, and the thing that I liked about what Randy and Max and others had started was one of the main goals is to review government policy, to review what the government lockdowns policy is, to ensure that we can make it better, make it right, and make those things happen. And that's the issue that, you know, that if we're going to be dealing with, you know, COVID-20 or more waves, my goodness, the sooner that we can fully engage Albertans and Canadians to have this discussion, and as Paul said about freedoms, the better. And the third thing, you know, Alberta is such a place of opportunity, of conservative values, of prosperity and freedom. I would like, you know, Alberta to be like South Dakota, Texas, or Florida, where we're that light of freedom and opportunity and where things are happening. And if that's the thing to do in terms of balancing safety and families and those kind of things, absolutely. And the other reason that ties back into the first one, Danielle, is we only, in all of Cypress Medicine Hat right now, only have 10 COVID cases. I heard there might be one in the hospital. 40 Mile County next door has none. You know, Brooks, an hour away, I think also has none. So an area 400 miles by 500 miles has 10 cases, and whether they're symptomatic or not, who knows? And then
I think we may have gotten Drew frozen. We've had that happen a couple of times. We'll get back to Drew in just a minute. I just want to share with you, I'm going to see if I can do a screen share on this, because there has been a group that wants to hold MLAs accountable. They started a poll online 2 days ago. And then you've got that for me, Derek? Beautiful. Started this poll 2 days ago, and they ended up with 37,000 responses that took place over the course of 2 days. So I wanted to just quickly go through these with a bunch of caveats. We know that these online polls get shared around by like minds, and so we need to see a random poll with the proper survey protocol before we can kind of take this to the bank. But I think it's an indication. I mean, it is 37,000 people who felt passionately enough that they decided to fill out this survey. So Derek, why don't we just zip through some of the results here, if you've got that up, or is Derek going to move it, or should I do a screen share here?
Oh, I thought you were.
Okay, well, you've got it up there, so I can do the screen share for sure. I can.
This is your screen share, yeah. So you can control that.
So I can control that right now. Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
Let me just go over and have a peek then and make sure that this is working. So this is again, Alberta Opinion Survey started the 22nd, and these are the results as of March 24th at 9 p.m. Things to make note of: most of these results happened within Alberta. So 37,000 responses, approximately 465 were out of the province, so they weren't included in the data, but you're still looking at 36,500. Here's the interesting thing. I don't know if Drew signed back in, but they have got a breakdown by constituency. So each individual MLA is going to be able to find out exactly what their constituents think of the action that they have taken. 46.1% are very unhappy with their MLA. 22.8% are slightly unhappy with their MLA, and only 31% are either unsure or happy. And note, Drew Barnes did fare very well on this response. Only 28% are unhappy with him. So a couple things. How do Albertans feel about lockdowns? 71.4% think we should fully open up. 14.7% say we should open up slightly. And you can even see that in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Lethbridge, and in Red Deer, it's the majority by a pretty wide margin, maybe not quite as large in Edmonton. How do Albertans feel about restrictions? 72.2% are completely fed up. 14% are slightly fed up. It's looking like 86% of Albertans are frustrated with the restrictions. Mask mandates, keep it or lose it. In Alberta, 78.9% want the mask mandate removed. And it looks like it's a plurality across, or not a plurality, a clear majority across all regions. Look at Peace River, 95%. It's a hardcore group up there. And 72% are skeptical that masks are efficient. 80% believe lockdowns don't work or do more harm than good. So this is just a snapshot in time of what is going on in Alberta based on this. I mean, we see online polls all the time. CTV had an online poll going around, so I don't know that this is all that much different. I do know that there's a group that's looking at doing some updated poll results, and hopefully we'll get those before next week. I think we're still waiting for Drew Barnes to come back in, but let me just stop that screen share, and we'll go back to having the continued conversation while we get Drew Barnes in. So I wanted to put that out there just to see if that kind of resonates with what you guys are hearing, because you're hearing from constituents, you're getting people contact your office, you're getting people emailing. So you've seen the picture in Alberta. Is that what's happening in Ontario, Randy, or are people still lock me down and lock me down harder? How do you find the general public is responding? I think we need to get you off mute there, Randy. Technical difficulties. Please stand by. This is when I'd normally go to a commercial break. So we might be we got problems with rural internet. Apparently, Elon Musk is going to solve that problem for us with this Skynet system. So let me, Randy. Why don't we put you back on pause? You can maybe call back in, and we'll see if we can get you.
Well, Daniel, if you like, we can briefly run through the poll that Western Standard.
Why don't we? Yeah, just because you're so Derek's poll that was done back in January had all of those features that we were talking about, where it's the random sample and you're making sure that it's proper survey results. But why don't you show us what you came up with back in January?
Yeah, so in January, we commissioned Main Street Research based out of Toronto. Don't hold that against them. They're a great research company. This is a credible, big name polling firm. What they do is they take, they do the results, but when they release the results, they weight it by region, by sex, by age, to give a reasonable representation of the population at large. So this is not self-selecting. This isn't just people who might be like-minded like us on here. If I put up a poll on this chat room right now, I'm guessing we'd probably get 99% saying they're against the lockdown. I'd be very happy about that, but I don't think that's probably realistic. So let's quickly look at the results as we go through here. So we commissioned this poll, as I said, in early January. We released it January 12th. The poll said that a majority, however slim, supported continued lockdowns, but there was a very large and growing minority that were opposed. Now, remember, most of the mainstream media at this time were saying that everybody—
scroll down a little bit more, Derek. We can't see the screen. There you go.
Yeah, so here's the poll here. Most of the mainstream media at the time were saying that everybody supports lockdowns. The only people who don't support lockdowns are crazy kooks. Well, in Alberta, we found there were 48% who supported continued lockdowns, 9% who supported indefinite lockdowns that would never end until COVID is 100% gone. So people who would— there's a chance COVID will never actually be 100% gone. So there were 9%, I call this the Karens, who wanted it to never go away. They love lockdowns. These are probably government employees. There were 27% who were against the lockdowns. One of them ended immediately, but accepted that there should be some restrictions left in place on a temporary basis. And another 12% who wanted the lockdowns and all restrictions entirely whatsoever done away with. What was really interesting is how it broke down along party lines. I always find it useful to try to dive into the data to see not just what people are thinking, but which people are thinking it. And what I found is 58% of those who said they planned to vote UCP in the next election wanted the lockdown ended immediately. Another 18% wanted it gone entirely without any restrictions whatsoever. Just 36% of UCP supporters supported keeping the lockdown in place in any way. By contrast, 63% of NDP supporters supported keeping it locked down. Well, 63% supported lockdowns continuing, and then 13% wanted those indefinite lockdowns that essentially never end. Unsurprisingly, intended voters for Paul Hinman's party, the Wild Rose Independence Party, they were overwhelmingly opposed to lockdowns, a large portion wanting that ended completely without any restrictions whatsoever.
All right.
So that's kind of a breakdown of how things stood in early January in Alberta, at least. But I think there are strong indications that the needle has continued to move since.
I think you're right. Let me see if it's moving in other parts of the country. So we've got let me go to Maxime first, because people are asking the question. I mean, we saw video of a 50,000 plus person march a couple of weeks ago, a freedom march, and that seems to be a pretty strong indication that Quebecers have had it. Or do you think that there's still strong support for Francois Legault's approach?
You're right. That was a big manifestation, a big protest, and a successful one. So I was very pleased to see that also. But yes, I think that at the end, the support for lockdowns is going down. I can tell you, I'm in Quebec, I'm in Montreal, I'm traveling in regions in Quebec and outside Quebec. I can see that the public opinion is moving on our direction, in the right direction, into more freedom. People are fed up, people are tired, and people realize that after a year, we have the data right now. We know what happened. We know the virus, and so we know how to fight the virus. We know that we must protect the older, and so that's I think people realize that, and that's why we have more support, and I'm very encouraging with that.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what the psychology is there? I'm sort of surprised that the reason I worry so much about what's happening in Quebec and Montreal in particular is that is where our prime minister is from. And so if you are looking at the stricter and stricter lockdowns in Quebec, that's going to have an impact on federal policy. So where does that support come from? Are you heavily influenced by France in Quebec, because they seem to be the ones that are first going down this path? Is there just this groundswell of support for authoritarian leaders? Is there any polling that supports this? What do you think happened?
Yeah, first of all, I must admit that the provincial government and the federal government, also the Trudeau government, they're taking their data from the World Health Organization and also here in Quebec from Paris for sure. They're looking in other jurisdictions what they're doing, and that's having a huge influence in Quebec. But at the end, right now, I think we have more coverage from what happened in the U.S. south of our border, in Texas, in Florida, and people are looking for another way to have their news, and they're using more social media. That's a good news, and I think that would be the influence. I believe that it would be very hard for the Trudeau government and also for the here in Quebec, for the provincial government, for Legault, to impose more lockdowns this fall. People would be used to gaining back their freedom during summertime, and I hope that our discussion and the fact that we are speaking about that and informing the population, that will have an impact on maybe this summer. And after that, I hope it would be very, very difficult for the federal government or any provincial government to impose lockdowns like that in September.
So let me go to Ontario again, Randy, and tell us what do you think is inspiring Doug Ford to become so authoritarian? I didn't expect that. I'm trying to think, what would have happened if it had been Rob Ford there? And I just feel like Rob Ford might have taken a bit of a different approach. I did not expect that our conservative premiers would follow this track. I expected them to be more like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis or Kristi Noem in South Dakota, and even Indiana has now opened up as of the last couple of days. So tell us the dynamic. What are you doing? Any polling? Why do you think it is that your government has gone in this direction? One more. Just need to undo your mute there, Randy.
Well, I'll say if Rob Ford was the premier, we would be in a much better position, I would say. However, he is, you know, part of it is polling. Part of it is that Doug Ford's staff and himself both understand that they've put themselves in a pickle. They know that they overreacted back in March and April, and we can be forgiving about that. You know, that was a uncertain period of time, but they really have trapped themselves within and become beholden to the mob that they helped create. We've got still a great number of people here who are fearful, and I would even say hysterical, about the danger of the virus, and they've been captured. Doug Ford has been captured by this mob, and as we saw last week in his press conference, where he said no political person will disagree with public health. It would be akin to political suicide and wrapping a rope around your neck and throwing yourself off the bridge. He's also become beholden to the public health. So this is a dangerous position that he's put himself in. And for him to get out of it now requires him to be truthful and tell people that he made a mistake for a good long time. And they're just not prepared for the blowback. And they're fearful that it will cost them the next election if they are truthful with the people of Ontario.
Are you, like Maxime Bernier said, are you getting the same kind of coverage now seeping into Ontario? I mean, he's saying people are looking more at Florida and more at Texas and other jurisdictions that are freeing up and saying, hey, why can't we do that here? Is the same thing happening in Ontario?
Oh, without a doubt. I don't think it's to the same extent that's happening in Alberta with the numbers that you showed up on screen, Danielle. But clearly, there is a significant increase in desire to remove the lockdowns. There's a significant increase in people who see that they are more harmful than they are good. There's also but we still have a big problem here in Ontario, and I think this is indicative throughout central Canada and the Maritimes, and why we're seeing differences out in BC and Alberta than we are in the rest of the country. You know, we have a very significant white-collar public sector workforce and employment base in central Canada. And for many of these people, life is bloody good. They don't have to get dressed in the morning and get in their car and commute. They can stay in their pajamas all day and read a couple emails and get paid every 2 weeks, and their pension keeps building. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's a real divide here between urban Ontario and rural Ontario, between white collar, blue collar, and it's hard to really pinpoint where things are. I know that the polling Ford is seeing is showing that he's still in majority territory. And that's really what's driving. As long as he thinks he can win with lockdowns, that's where he's going to keep his, that's where he's going to keep the caucus parked, in lockdown.
Well, Danielle, it's your turn to be on the mute now.
Sorry about that, guys. So Drew, let me go to you next. And I know it's a tough position, and I don't want to get you in a position where you get kicked out of caucus, because I understand that there is kind of a caucus solidarity, but you have broken ranks a bit. And maybe you can just give us, I'm trying to ask you a question to get some insight without getting you in trouble. Maybe you can tell us what it is that drove the reversal, because the premier, I think, got a lot of support up until mid-November, when he was saying he was balancing lives and livelihoods. And I thought he was doing a really darn good job of that. And then wham, just flipped 180 degrees, and he won't flip back. And I don't know why he's so dug in, because he was looking at the right indicators of hospitalization and ICU. We're in no danger of seeing hospitals overrun. we know exactly who's the most at risk. We know how to protect them. We know who's not at risk. We know who we could ease up the restrictions on. We're seeing restrictions ease up in the South. Why is that not influential on the Premier's decision making? What are we missing that he sees? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, not directly. I'll back up though to initially the Premier and the cabinet, the PIC cabinet that runs this, came out with a regional approach, letting the cities decide their own mask bylaws, letting the cities have some influences. And when that was happening, the polling was a bit higher. Certainly people in Medicine Hat were happier. This Council of Medicine Hat actually voted, some of them voted against a mask bylaw, and that mask bylaw expired in early March. So for some reason, he changed from the regional approach, and I, the specific reasons I don't know, but there's just an instance going on where there's just so many other things that we have to deal with, and it's been a concern.
Why isn't he persuaded by fellow travelers in the Liberty movement? Why isn't he persuaded by Ron DeSantis and Kristi Noem? I would have thought that would have drawn him some inspiration, and he would have developed some courage to go the same route. Why is that not influential on him?
Yeah, again, I can't speak for him. I don't know. In question period today, though, Health Minister Shandro did partially answer that a regional approach was somewhere being looked at. So that is some good news. There's and again, that, I think it was Max that mentioned it. Our opposition here, the NDP, would even lock down tighter. They call for that all the time. So maybe it's back to just simple politics. And that's one of the reasons that I was grateful when the Liberty Caucus came along and the opportunity to speak up. Cypress Medicine Hat constituents, quite respectful, wearing masks wherever they go. But the degree of fatigue, I'm worried about the non-compliance. The last 3 Saturdays, I've had between 50 and 100 people outside my constituency office in support of what I've been doing, in support of speaking up, and in support of more freedoms. And, hopefully that will grow. I mean, it's a big weekend with Easter coming up. And, there's a lot of families, of course, that want to celebrate that. One of the things that's really been hit hard here is the fact that how essential our spiritual health is. And, we ended up with a situation with a pastor in jail, and all the in and outs of that just showed that, that one of the essential elements of life, our spiritual health, could have been addressed in a different way. And, those are the things to get right from this minute on, and to get right in the future.
All right, Drew, let me turn it over to Paul Hinman and get your thoughts on things. I mean, it sounds like they're now sort of reluctantly, perhaps maybe looking at doing a regional approach. It sounds like in Quebec and Ontario, they already have a regional approach. Do you have any more insights about what happened, why the flip, and why the Premier seems to have dug in and won't go back to the same kind of balance he had before? You're on mute there, Paul.
There we go. Thank you. I think the most significant one is that this whole thing has been driven by polls and public opinion, and it's not driven by the science, the data. That's out the window. And so when you start doing that, it's like the wind. It changes, your course changes, and there's nothing set. I mean, he had all these goalposts. As soon as he got to them, they were thrown out the window. And I think he's just purely driven by the fact of what have we got to do to gain popularity? What are people thinking? What are they wanting? I know that they're polling all the time, and he comes out with his numbers. They don't, what would I say, align with the more independent ones, but yet that's what he's using for guiding. But the bottom line is that people need their freedom, and what people that are wanting the lockdowns and stuff fail to see is that they have their freedom to stay home. They have their freedom to wear a mask out there. That they want to point the finger and blame that you're the curse of society. You're the one that's causing the problems, and we need to remove these elements for the benefit of the good of the group. And they're losing on the individual. And like I say, the only individuals they count, and they do it, anonymously, are the COVID responses. when the harm that's being done, like I say, to our children, to business people, to families, it's just unbelievable that all those numbers are not being looked at. When he says he's balancing things, there's nothing to balance when you don't say the numbers. They don't say that, look, we had 15 opioid deaths in the last day or anything else. It's just COVID. And so they've lost perspective. They're doubling down. This is what I want to say tyrants and politicians do, is they just want to keep doubling down, thinking they're going to get out of this. But this is no different than the fact of the deficits. They get away with deficit spending year after year after year, and they've never hit the wall. Unfortunately, the deficit of our loss of our freedoms is going to hit a wall much sooner. And again, the tragedy of it and the crisis that it's going to cause and is causing is just beyond acceptance, and we've got to stop that. It's a real problem.
Let me go to Randy again. Randy, I'll just remind you to take your mute off before you start speaking. But maybe you can answer the question as well about where you get your information from that has caused you to come to a different conclusion. Our listeners know where I get the information from because I shared as much as I could while I was on the radio. Dr. R.A. Jaffe, I had him on twice. But I've also had David Redman on, who was the lieutenant colonel who used to be in charge of emergency management here. We did a segment with Dr. John. He was my guiding light through the past year, telling me what studies made sense, which ones didn't, keep me out of the ditch, telling me what was the promising research on therapeutics. And then we interviewed 3 doctors yesterday who took a different view on lockdown, that the lockdowns are just going to be far more devastating to public health and mental health than COVID, and also putting it into perspective that the people we know who are the most at risk are those over the age of 75 with multiple pre-existing conditions. And if you're under 50 and healthy, you're at less risk than influenza. So the audience who's tuned in, we're aware of all of that. We are exposing ourselves to alternative information. Where are you getting your information from so that we know why it is you take the view that you do?
Well, that's a good question, Danielle, because you can't get it from the mainstream media as a rule. There is such a dissent and suppression. There's such a suppression of dissenting views. You have to go out scouring and looking for what people are saying, but they're out there. The former chief medical officer of health in Ontario, Dr. Richard Shabazz, has spoken quite critically about these lockdowns. Of course, there's eminent medical professionals around the world with the Great Barrington Declaration, and Michael Yeadon, former chief scientist at Pfizer, have all spoken out highly critical of these things. But it does take a fair amount of time of looking to find these individuals, like Dr. Roger Hodgkinson out in Edmonton. When I showed his YouTube, I did an interview with him on YouTube, and YouTube banned me for 90 days for doing so. So, you know, I have a great many doctors here in Ontario that I talk with, as well as across the country, as well as a great many eminent scientists and professors in Canada and outside. And but for the lay person, it can be very difficult to find the dissenting views and the actual facts and evidence, because the mainstream media is certainly not going to give dissenting views and facts adequate airtime. That's without question.
Yeah, and I observed that too. I would say that the Post media chain is doing a really good job of allowing people like Brian Lilly and Anthony Furey to interview doctors and give a broader perspective. So that's a positive development. But let me put it to Maxime Bernier, because I agree with Randy. It is really difficult to get good, credible information. Doctors are afraid to step forward and offer their viewpoint because they're getting threatened by their College of Physicians and Surgeons, or getting threatened that their hospital privileges might be revoked. I mean, everybody's on everybody who is in the medical profession gets paid by government. So we're not getting the full range of views that we otherwise would on this issue. So how do you get balance? Where do you get your information from, Maxime?
But I must say that, you know, I was speaking actually a couple of days ago with John Carpe. is the head of the.
Oh, now we've got a freeze in Quebec. See, there you are. This is what's happening. We can't get the information out to you without it being frozen. Let me, I don't know if we have to get Maxime to dial back in. We may have to, but let me get the two Albertans to weigh in on this, because Drew, you've taken quite a different view from your caucus and your leader on this. Where is it that you're getting your information from?
Well, reading things like the Great Barrington Declaration, it's nice to see 2 or 3 papers out the last little while stating the effects of the lockdown are worse than the effects of the virus. But a lot is owed to some really strong Albertans and really strong people like Dennis Modry, like the Colonel Dave Redmond, who reached out and spoke up and told me their way of looking thing and made us start to ask some questions and look for answers. Every day, Danielle, I probably get between 5 and 10 Albertans send me something that is concerned about everybody in society, but realizes that there's more than just COVID that we have to deal with. And then when the mental health thing hit in Medicine Hat, and it hit hard, and I understand we're not the only community, of course, it made me realize how important it is. It made me realize that something had to be done, and I'm honored to speak up. I'm paid to speak up, so I wanted to.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Paul, where are you getting your information from as well? Because I guess the point is that I understand that there's suppression. I totally get that. But if I've been able to find alternative opinions, and I'm just a member of the media, you guys are in public roles, you're getting emails from political parties. This is not hard information to get. And so a lack of knowledge on the part of Premier Jason Kenney or Premier Doug Ford or Premier Francois Legault, that doesn't fly with me. That they could seek out the information if they wanted to, and I just want to know where you're getting it from. So, Paul, where do you get your information from?
Well, I'm going to say that the 3 that have been the most helpful, it's always good to go local. And again, with Dr. Dennis Modry, Dr. Jaffrey, you have Dr. Hodkinson, they've been awesome in speaking out. And again, I mean, they've received, like Dr. Hodkinson shared me his letter that the College of Physicians has sent to him and other physicians on speaking out. And so I totally agree. I think it's shameful that our own government hasn't put out this information every day. That should be their job, is to gather this information. And again, you listen to Christy Noem, she has it. There's so many doctors down in the States. I mean, I really like the testimony of Dr. Corey Perry when he went before the Senate and others, and the Great Barrington Declaration. All of those ones that you're talking about, they're out there and they're available, but they're being dismissed. And the censorship, I mean, I've been kicked off of YouTube because of this as well, and been deplatformed. And so the censorship is just unbelievable. But the sad thing is that there's still too many people that are trusting Henshaw and Kenney that they're there for us, and they don't realize that that they're not there for us. They're there to protect their little fiefdom and what they're trying to do, and it's just appalling that they're not bringing these other alternative views or allowing them to say, people should look at these, because we should have been doing a lot more research. Again, even with therapeutics, there's no reason not to be having those going on in our own province, in our own senior care facilities, and showing that the results are very positive, and yet they're not doing it. But it's out there. You go on the internet, you start looking. It's difficult, but again, there's just so many names out there. And again, when you go to England or Ireland, there's a doctor. Germany, there's lots of people speaking out there, and they're forming groups. And you just need to Google search it, and there's lots out there that haven't been deplatformed yet, but it's getting more and more difficult. And again, they're certainly cutting down on our ability here, and the censorship is just shocking to me. It's as bad as the fact that the government won't protect our freedoms, and again, destroying people's lives and their livelihood, and claiming that they're trying to balance it when they don't look at the individual that they're running over, and saying, well, that's all part of the balance. It isn't.
All right. I want to do a video from Michelle Rempel, and I think I've done my share screen correctly, but I think we need to get Derek to put it in perfect. So let me just sort of set this up for you, because Michelle Rempel put forward a motion in the House of Commons where she's calling on the government to find a way to safely, gradually, and permanently lift the COVID restrictions. She's not talking about getting back to some kind of new normal that everybody keeps referring to. She wants the old normal that we used to have. And I want you to hear the argument and why it is she put this motion forward. And then we're going to get our panel to weigh in on what their proposals are for how you get a data-driven approach to return to a safe, gradual, and permanent lifting of all COVID restrictions. First, let's hear what Michelle Rempel had to say. This was her setting up the motion, explaining why it is she decided to put it forward in the first place. She asked a question in the House of Commons and was not very happy with the answer. So here she is.
Yesterday in the House of Commons, I asked the health minister what I thought was a very simple question, a nonpartisan question, which was, when can fully vaccinated seniors give their grandchildren a hug? And the answer that we got back from the health minister a year into the pandemic could be summarized as, I don't know, I'm not sure I want to tell you about this. I think it's a provincial jurisdiction, but I'm going to give the province's advice. And that's not what Canadians want to hear. I think that answer encapsulates best the need for this motion. We're a year into COVID-19 and enough is enough. A year ago, Canadians from coast to coast pulled together and said, yeah, we've got to shut down the economy. We've got to undertake these restrictions to buy public health experts and all of us here in this place, provincial governments, municipal leaders, buy us time to figure out what COVID-19 was, how it spreads, who is most vulnerable, and develop tools to permanently combat it, like therapeutics, rapid tests, and vaccines. And a year into the pandemic, those tools now exist. The problem is that in Canada, we have not had clear guidance from our health officials on the circumstances on which widespread mass lockdowns can safely end.
She's totally right. And so let's see if we can fill some of that information gap here. I don't know if we've got Maxime Bernier back, Derek. Do we not? Doesn't look like he's with us. So we may have to continue on without him. If he joins us, we'll get him to weigh in on the conversation again. But Randy, do talk about that, because that, I think, really does summarize what my frustration is. Fair enough. I'm not going to blame you back in March and April of last year when everything was confused and you didn't know, and we had problems with procurement, and we didn't have rapid testing, and we weren't really sure what antivirals and what anti-inflammatories might work, and there wasn't a vaccine in sight. But fast forward a year later, we have all those things. We have approved rapid tests that are easily deployable. We have a range of therapeutics, from vitamin D to the hydroxychloroquine zinc azithromycin mixture to ivermectin to colchicine to various other steroids and other anti-inflammatories. And we also have 4 vaccines that are now approved, including Johnson & Johnson. So the world today is 100%, 200% different than it was a year ago. And so why can't politicians say the world has changed, therefore we change along with it? This is what I'm confused by. So did you find Michelle Rempel-Garner's argument compelling that we do have these tools now, and so now it's time to take a different approach?
Well, we've had these tools for quite some time, Danielle. We've known the evidence. Unlike the catastrophic and the apocalyptic models in March, we have a year of actual data and evidence. So we know what the danger is, who's at danger, and who is not. We also have a year of evidence of really good treatments. And we also have a year of building herd immunity as well. Mm. And that's why we're seeing very, very few hospitalizations. So, even the UK Ministry of Health, they have a specialized medical team called the Health Advisory and Recovery Team, HART. And let me just read and they just put out a document 2 weeks ago. a study in the UK, and this is an official government body, and it says here, all international studies bear out that lockdowns have proven to be a complete failure as public health measures to contain a respiratory virus. They called for a return to the lockdown-free pre-COVID-19 pandemic plan. And that's, that's what we ought to be doing. That's what the evidence points out. And we have the pre-COVID-19 pandemic plan. Colonel Redmond has made that available far and wide through many presentations. So we have the data, we have the evidence, we know what the plan should be. It looks a lot like what we were doing before March of 2020. And a couple of minor differences, of course, for long-term care and a few other specialized or specific areas within society. But otherwise, it's the evidence says we should go back to normal, which was also safe. Before COVID-19, we conducted ourselves safely. So, I think Michelle Rempel has laid it out. I think it's very clear. All the evidence is very clear. Why will the politicians not do this? Listen, there is a lot of money at play here. A lot. People would find it astonishing just to see how much money is in play here with our governments, between big pharma, between all the testing, the vaccines. Public health is awash with money. Our hospital associations are gaining bucket loads of money on new builds and renovations. So there is a vested interest to keep this pandemic going for people's self-interest. It's being exploited. The politicians need to find the backbone. They need to find the spine and the courage to turn off the taps and not allow the public to be exploited any further.
Let me go to Paul Hinman now and see if he'll echo some of those sentiments. So, I appreciate the fact that, and I'm not going to hold anybody in negative light for March and April. I felt at that time, because we had enough information coming out of Italy and China to know that it was those with pre-existing conditions and those who were aged who were most at risk. But you know what? You never know. Things could develop differently. I get that. But it became very, very clear with the abundance of evidence that was the case. And to me, we could have ended up going lockdown free as soon as we hit the summer, and the caseload ended up declining, and just done focused protection once we had a new respiratory virus season in the fall and winter. So I'm still a little bit perplexed with knowing that there are these therapeutics out there in case somebody gets sick, knowing that you can take a vaccine as a preventative if you're in one of those high-risk groups. And I think we keep bragging that we've got all the high-risk groups with at least their first shot, and then rapid testing on top of that you're able to at least target the long-term care facilities so that anyone going in and out, you'd be able to know right away whether they were infected. It seems like these are enough tools. So what am I missing, Paul?
Well, I don't think we're missing anything, and it's very alarming the way she phrased it, and I do agree. Back in March and April, it was a little bit scary. The video that they were showing was certainly scary for people. But even back then, when they originally were putting out that numbers, they didn't say every day that, oh my goodness, we've had 20 deaths, and by the way, 19 of those deaths were in long-term care facilities with people with 3 or 4 more coexisting problems. That they didn't ever do that. And government's job should have been to give confidence and hope, and instead all they do is instill fear, and they put the numbers out there in such a way to instill fear. Again, I'll keep saying what they've done to the grandchildren who are afraid to go see their grandparents now. And again, I've talked to several grandparents, my mother included. This isn't living, being in isolation. My mother deteriorated terrible over the year of isolation, and it was not good for her health. The harm was done. She's since passed away, and again, that is just terrible that last year and the last week I was finally allowed to go in without having to try and cheat the system to go see my own mother, because they said, well, like she's at the end, and it's just wrong. You know, you can't get together for a family funeral. Everything that they're doing is wrong. And to say that, oh, we now have a vaccine so they can come in, I mean, this is an experimental vaccine. We don't even know the repercussions. And the biggest problem that we're doing, and what scares me the most, is that we're taking away our innate immune system and something that has protected humanity from the beginning, and we're saying that that doesn't work anymore. But what we'll do is give you a specific vaccine for a specific virus, and so you won't get the broad spectrum. You know, your body's not going to respond to this. And again, the lockdowns have delayed the inevitable, to where now, if in fact we have a breakout, how bad and how severe is it going to be? And again, in the year that the government has done nothing. If they needed more respiratory therapists, there was a lot that they could have been training in a year. They could have been building facilities. We could have so much of more robust system where we even separate and have facilities that are purely for treating people with COVID, so we don't have to shut down our main facilities. And they've done nothing except for continue and perpetuate the fear mongering and the scaring, and it's just wrong. And no, I don't agree with Michelle. We don't need to wait 20 days. We don't need new numbers. We need to recognize the fact that this is like every other virus that we've had, and sometimes more people are affected. But the young and our children, they should be in school. They should be singing. They should be dancing. They should be out doing their sports. And we're not allowing them to do any of that. And no, I disagree that we need to open up and then practice, you know, that focused protection for seniors. But even that's been over the top and not in their best interest.
We'll talk about that in just a second as well, because I want to know what a better approach would be for focus protection. But I see Maxime Bernier is back, and I was going to play the Michelle Rempel quote and then go first to him, but we lost him. So let me just summarize the quote that I played for you, Maxime. She talked about asking the health minister, when are we going to have grandmas able to hug their kids again? Or their grandkids again. And the health minister came back and said, well, I don't really know. It's kind of provincial jurisdiction. But her point was, you know, maybe March, April, we didn't have all the information, but now we have therapeutics that we know can be effective. We have rapid testing so that we can quickly identify somebody who's sick, and we have the rollout of vaccines, 4 of them. We're in a different world now. Why can't we develop a plan within 20 days for how we get back to, as she's describing it, safe, gradual, and permanent end to lockdown restrictions? So I just wanted to get your response to that. What did you think of her speech and her motion?
Yeah, first of all, about the motion, Danielle, we don't need a plan. We don't need 20 days. We need to act right now. We have all the data. That virus is out there for a year now. We know who is affecting, and that's the older, so we need to protect them. But also, yes, we must admit that it's a provincial jurisdiction. Healthcare, it's a 100% provincial jurisdiction. But the federal government has a big role to play. And the federal government right now, the Trudeau government, is encouraging provinces to have draconian measures, lockdowns, curfew like we have in Quebec. And so what Michelle Rempel must ask and Aaron O'Toole must do is to act right now and asking the federal government to stop encouraging provinces to take these draconian measures first. And the way to do that is to stop all funding coming from the federal government. The federal government is giving grants and subsidies to businesses and to individuals because of these lockdowns. So just stop that funding, and I can tell you that provinces will look twice before imposing another lockdowns. And we don't need also these hotel, COVID-19 hotel jail that we have right now. So we need action right now. So a plan, we don't need a plan. We have all the data right now. The federal government must encourage provinces to stop these draconian lockdowns by stopping to give them money, and all these programs that the federal government put forward, that must end. So that will be good, and we will be able to be free again. But at the same time, that will help to fight the huge deficit that we have right now at the federal level. So it's a little bit late asking for another 20 days and another plan. We don't need a plan, and that's not under the federal jurisdiction. The federal just has to stop giving money to provinces. And I can tell you in Alberta, in Quebec, in Ontario, they will stop these lockdowns rapidly.
I missed your answer to the other question because your computer froze. I was wondering where you get your information that has informed how you're looking at this issue, because it may be that in Quebec and en français that there are different scholars and it's a different and more robust conversation than is what's happening in the English speaking part of the country. Can you tell us why it is that you came to the conclusion that you did? Are there some doctors or medical advice that you can direct us to?
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking at some expert in Quebec, some doctor that are very prominent doctor working for University of Montreal and other university in Quebec. They're dissident. They're challenging the provincial government. But the most important for Canadians, they must go to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They have data coming from Statistic Canada. And so we know that lockdowns are hurting more the population than the virus right now. And so also on their website, as you know, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, he's suing and they are suing some provincial governments. And so they have expert testimony from experts on their website. There's a lot of good information over there. So I'm encouraging people to go and see that information on their website. It's all about information on our country coming from Statistic Canada. There's another way to fight that virus instead of having curfew and lockdowns.
Okay, let me go to Drew Barnes now, because I think that the answers that came out of that question and that debate is that, and I have it in front of me, Health Minister Patty Hajdu said that it was the Premier's job. So it's the Premier's job to make the changes and not the federal government. She said that it shows a lack of confidence in public health officials, her motion does, a lack of understanding of the jurisdictional right and responsibility of provinces and territories to deliver healthcare and to protect the health of constituents. Kevin Lamoureux, the parliamentary secretary to the government health leader, responded saying, provinces are responsible for putting in place COVID-19 restrictions. Is it the Conservative Party's policy that Ottawa should start overriding provincial jurisdiction? So all of this keeps saying, it's up to you, it's up to you, it's up to you. We've got nothing to do with this. And yet we do also know that the Prime Minister was musing about imposing a federal emergency and taking the decision out of the province's hands. We know that we're 100% reliant on the federal government to get our vaccine allocation. We also know that they approve rapid tests and they get to approve a variety of therapeutics for potential use. We know that they have the ability to shut down our airports and put people in COVID hotels. And we also did see a backbench Liberal MP musing that any premier who reduced restrictions could face criminal sanction. So we're getting a mixed message from the federal government. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on this, because I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the premier is being held hostage here. And part of the reason why he's taken the view that he has is because of the pressure that is being put on him by the federal government. And then they keep denying it. Tell me your perspective.
Yeah, very, very similar. Thanks for that. And first of all, a shout out to Michelle for contributing to the solution. I mean, a year ago with the Buffalo Declaration, she took some risks then and did things. So I'm so glad she's continuing to do that. Yeah, Canada has got so many layers of government, so much government. And we have a system where the feds take money out of Alberta and then put it back, but they put conditions on it. We're in a situation where all provinces are borrowing deeply now, and I think most of the bonds are being bought by the government of Canada. So that creates some constraints and some restrictions. Absolutely, that more provincial oversight, rather, more. When you have two bosses, nobody's in charge. Let's put the provinces in charge and let's give them resources to do it. But let's look at that, Danielle. That's one of the things that a lot of Cypress medicine hatters and Albertans have suggested great concern to me. Here in Alberta, our Alberta Health Services and our Alberta Health are up to about $25 billion a year. That's 45%-ish of the provincial budget, and we're in the same spot we were at 13 months ago, where we're unsure if we can handle surge capacity, if there is a whole bunch of need for extra surgeries, emergency surgeries or essential surgeries, even a COVID spike. The Medicine Hat Hospital, as an example, I think has 2 floors that are completely vacant, and at the same time, we're shutting our whole entire economy down because of the healthcare. It makes one wonder. Back to what other people on the panel said. Yeah, so much good information there. But in Florida, they've had a 5-minute rapid blood test for long-term care workers for a long time. On your way into work to take care of our seniors who are our prized possessions and are most vulnerable. They've known for a long time that a 5-minute rapid blood test will protect them. And let's talk about the consequences of all this. I mean, the mental health and what it's done to families is so sad. But the CIBC was out about a week ago. There's about $100 billion rather extra money sitting in Canadians' bank accounts, and this money, will be spent and it will be inflationary. Look at how much the cost of food has gone up. Lumber has quadrupled. Even canola, which is the oil for frying our chicken wings, has gone crazy expensive. We are headed to some huge costs, and if that continues, how does the central bank, how does the government of Canada control inflation? By increasing interest rates is the conventional way. Can you imagine if interest rates had to go up 2 or 3 points? There's other ways, of course, the government can take money out of the economy. And we saw the Globe and Mail suggest one last week, starting to tax Canadians on the gain on our principal residence. What element of our life doesn't have some element of taxation from one of the levels of government now? That's about the only one left, although municipalities and property taxes are already there. So what are the ramifications for all this for down the road? Albertans, our youth, we need to be able to plan. We need to be able to progress. We need to be able to build. And let's make it so that they can have that opportunity. And these are the things that politicians and journalists will be talking about for a long time as they affect every level of our society.
This is what I don't understand, and I'll go back to, we'll sort of go east to west again. I'll go back to Maxime to get his comment on this. A reckoning is coming. Like you can't keep people suppressed with information. You cannot keep the truth from coming out. You cannot avoid the consequences of all of the borrowing and spending. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost. And so why would they think that there isn't going to be a much greater political consequence down the road once we all realize they did nothing to mitigate some of the things that Drew was talking about? So let's then talk about that, Maxime, because if you were prime minister, what would you do? How would you, if we parachuted you in to this current situation and you said, okay, stop everything, we're going to take a totally different approach. Tell me what your plan would be. You don't need 20 days to come up with it. You got it now. What would we do? Oh, sorry, Maxime, you're on mute. Go ahead one more time.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'll give you an example. When I was industry minister, I had my civil servant that was giving me advice, and also I had my private sector economist. And 4 times on 5, I was listening to private sector economists. And each time that I had to take a decision, we had a debate, and the best one won, and the best one was almost all the time the private sector economists. So I'll do the same thing. I would have done the same thing as prime minister. Have your civil servant, but also expert from outside the government. And we know that's, yes, in the beginning, maybe we didn't have all these data, all the information that we have right now. But, why doing lockdowns when it was an experiment that failed? We never did lockdowns for a health crisis. And so that was the first time. So I'm not a kind of a guy that wants to try something for the first time and being the first one to try it. I think I will have challenge a little bit more my civil servant, and without any lockdown, just protect the older. That must have been the solution in the beginning. And a lot of experts said that in the beginning also, to protect the elders. Actually, in Quebec, 85% of the deaths in Quebec, it's coming from the long-term senior home. And that's the government-owned, government long-term senior home. So the government of Quebec is responsible indirectly of 85% of the deaths. So why shutting down our economy? And you're right, Danielle, to say that's a huge cost. And now what happened? The Bank of Canada is printing money. And when you print money, you'll have inflation. Yes, Drew said we have inflation right now with our grocery, and it's coming. And we may have 5-6% inflation in a year. That's a cost. Inflation is a hidden tax. It's the worst of all the taxes. The federal government does not have the courage to tax people for all that spending, that these huge deficits that the federal government is doing. Instead, they are printing money, and we will pay because we'll have our dollar in our pocket, but we won't be able to buy the same amount of goods and services with that dollar. So that's why it's a kind of a tax. And now the federal government and provincial government are looking at the short term, and they try to do everything that they think is right now without looking at the future. And they're saying for them, money, it's falling from the sky, there's no problem, but we will all pay for that. We will all be poorer for that because of bad policies at the federal and provincial level. And that's why we need to fight. And that's why I was very pleased to be part of the End the Lockdowns Caucus and fighting for more freedom, because that's the only solution.
Okay, I want to find out a little bit more about what those long-term consequences will be, but let's see if we can get some specifics about how each of you would respond if you were handed this situation today. Would you just I'll go to you, Randy, would you just do what they did in Texas, where they basically did a press conference and said, okay, we're passing an edict. As of tomorrow, 100% of businesses will be allowed to open 100%. Or will you just pass an edict and say, okay, the mask mandate, it's over? Or you just do what Ron DeSantis said and said that everybody is allowed to make their own choices, and he actually forbade his municipalities from overriding the decision at the state level and imposing additional restrictions. So I'm just throwing those on the table to get your feedback. What would you do? Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, I would rip the bandage off, Danielle. We need to face up that is where we ought to be. I do want to just make another point that Max brought up, a real good point. The provinces are doing this in large part, not just with the money that is being incented by the feds to the provinces to do it, but also by our federal public health agency and Dr. Tam. They are really setting the stage that would put the provincial chief medical officer of health in a predicament, in a professional predicament, if they were opposing Dr. Tam as well. So for the feds to step back and say that this is the provinces, that's wholly disingenuous, without a doubt. But going back, we know that even if we ripped the bandage off today, all Canadians are going to be experiencing a significant reduction in their standard of living. With a $400 billion federal deficit, huge deficits throughout every province, the increase in the monetary supply, we've seen here in rural Ontario and much of rural Canada, we're seeing a hyperinflation on real estate values, a hyperinflation in the stock market, and people need to realize that what they have today is probably the best they're ever going to have for quite some time. As there's no other way around this. Our productivity levels have gone in the toilet in the last year. Our economy has shrunk. Our deficits have increased. Our tax base has diminished. So there is a reckoning coming, but it's going to be better, and it's not going to be as painful if we rip the bandage off now and allow the data, the evidence, and the science guide us to what the solution is, and that is a free market, a free country, and we don't need to wait any longer to decide. The evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. Our hospitals here in, just to give you an example, Danielle, here in Ontario, we have about 400 people in hospital with COVID, but we have to understand we also have 24,000 beds capacity here in Ontario. The COVID component is hardly measurable, and even at our very peak last April, the most people we ever had in hospital with COVID was 1,300. And at that time, we had built up our capacity with field hospitals to over 30,000 beds. So there's a reckoning coming, and we better brace ourselves. But it's going to be a lot less painful if we do it quick and fast, and for politicians just to say, listen, we made a mistake, but now we know better, and we're going to get back to living free like free Canadians ought to.
All right. Thank you for that, Randy. Let me go to Drew, because, Drew, I think that we have now such Stockholm syndrome that we're prepared to just, please just let us move to step 3. Just please let us get a little bit more of our freedom back. I'm prepared to wear the mask. I'm prepared to continue to have some of the restrictions delayed. Like I'm just wondering what about the credibility of the UCP government, because if you set bars out and then you keep on moving them, you end up getting people saying you can't trust the government. I know all kinds of people who just aren't even following the rules right now, which isn't what you want. You want to maintain law and order, but if you can't trust government to make good on its commitments, then you're not going to have that kind of continued compliance. So tell me, Drew, what do you think the government should do right now? Should they just commit to opening up with the targets that they've set, or should they rip off the Band-Aid, as Randy and Maxime have said?
Well, I think they should go regional. We've got many counties, many areas with no cases. Certainly in Cypress Medicine Hat and my area, there's very, very few. We absolutely need to open it up on a regional basis. We need to have some involvement with people in the 2 big metros to see what they think is best. Local people make the best decisions, but I am so much involved. I'm a believer in opening it up. We're in the 13th month now, and it's time to do that. A couple of other thoughts. Who's taking it harder on the chin in this pandemic than our small business people? The CFIB had out the other day that the average small business has maybe taken on 180,000 of debt. 50% of them may not reopen. A small business in Alberta pays 12% tax, 2% to the province, 10% to the feds. I would immediately end the 2% small business tax. I know it's small, but it'll give them a glimmer of hope to get back to work, and we certainly deserve, they deserve at least that. Randy said the word productivity. Energy East, Northern Gateway, I know that's federal. I know there's other provinces involved. You look at a cargo ship stuck in the Suez Canal, or the Panama Canal rather, and the prices are going up because of that. When are we going to realize that we have these resources, and if we're going to be a country, let's work together? The vaccine and pharmaceuticals is another perfect example. Wasn't it the European Union today or yesterday playing with some law to not export vaccinations? And we, of course, delegated that to them. We have so many opportunities for our people who are risk takers, productive and good, to get involved in these things. Government just has to get out of the way. And other jurisdictions are leading the way. I love what Florida did. I'm always a believer in giving families, people, and businesses choice. If you want to stay at home and wear a mask, do it. If you want to go out and engage in a normal life, please do it. Danielle, the Toronto Blue Jays season opener is in Arlington, Texas, and it's a sold-out stadium.
Wow, that's something. It was the Suez Canal. You were right the first time, but I understand the confusion. Yeah, because it was as I understand it, was a Japanese ship that had left from China carrying goods from Taiwan en route to Holland, and it was flagged in Panama. So that's, I guess, sort of gives you an idea of just how global the market is. And you're quite right. It does look like it's going to be wedged out of there for weeks. So I don't know what happens when you disrupt 12% of international trade for weeks. I think we're going to end up with even more serious problems of inflation. I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on that, but I want to go back to Paul and see what your view is on this. Do you think that it's the regional approach is one we should take? Here's the challenge that we have. The public has been in such a state of fear for so long. I think politicians now need to baby step walk everybody off the brink and get them back to some kind of sense of normalcy. And I don't know if there's would be widespread public support if Jason Kenney came out and did what we've seen in some of those states in the United States, just 100% allowing businesses to reopen. I think they'd be quite happy if he just lived up to the staged reopening plan that he put forward. What do you think? Do you see it differently?
Yes, I truly do see it differently, and I agree with what they're saying. Rip the bandage off, but there's a couple things, I guess. Basically, I actually believe in people to have faith in their assessment on what their health is, on what their wellness is, and what their safety is. And by ripping the band-aids off, it doesn't say that everybody's got to go out and go to the gym tomorrow and exercise for a half hour. Those people who have the confidence and the ability and the health to go do that can. That we don't need government monitoring and deciding every aspect of our lives. And so by ripping the band-aids off, there will be a slow transition because many people are paranoid and won't go out to do those things, but let the public do it. But probably what scares me the most and hasn't been mentioned here is what the government really needs to do is actually pass legislation protecting individuals. And again, I guess I should say back our constitution of our freedoms and our property, starting with our own body. But what we need is to actually have legislations where businesses are going to be fined or criminally charged if they're going to force people to take vaccinations or not come in here. We need to start protecting the individual from big government because they want to impose it. And businesses saying, oh, you can't come in here. Or this, look at Israel and the state they're in with a vaccine passport. We need to start protecting the individual, not just rip the band-aids off, but tell all these people that we've instilled so much fear in these corporations and saying it's their civil duty is to say, whoa, back off. If you start pointing a finger and demanding people to do these things, we're going to be charging you. We need to protect the individual. We need to allow freedom. And again, all of those other things that they're talking about, inflation and the impact. And again, you know, the most important thing that we always talk about local economies is to buy local. And again, energy security is so paramount, and yet we've been locked in here, and we've got this hate, and the Supreme Court, you know, just ruled against the carbon tax. And yet, so okay, let's bring stuff in, you know, from Venezuela, from Saudi, all of these rogue nations and stuff will bring in, which hurts our economy with the inflation. Now more than ever, we should be looking at Northern Gateway, Energy East. We should be doing all we can, the Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, and working with our First Nations. There's so many opportunities that we could have if we just backed up and said, you know what, we're wrong. We need to let people have their freedom, and then they can assess their risk, and we're going to support them in that, and we're not going to allow this intrusion and liberty that's been lost any longer.
All right. I want to understand where we're going with this, because I know where you want us to be, but I fear that you've got the politicians going in the exact opposite direction. So Maxime, just, you know, give it to me straight up. Are they keeping us locked down until after Easter? They cancel Christmas. Are they canceling Easter too? Is that why the fear machine has amped up again, is because they want to justify either continued lockdowns or greater lockdowns to see us through Easter, when all of us would be getting together and finally hugging our family? Is that what's happening here?
First, I hope that at Easter we'll be able to be all together with our family and doing what we want to do. But you know, what the government, the federal government and these provincial government are doing, They're politicians. They're looking at poll. We said that in the beginning of that discussion. They're looking at polling. They're looking at focus group. And now there's a movement. People are more aware of the situation. And I think, we will be freer at Easter and during summertime. But the other question that is more important also is all the question on vaccine. Do we think that we'll have in Canada mandatory vaccine? Personally, I'm against mandatory vaccine. I won't take, and I'm not taking, and I won't take the COVID vaccine. I'm 58 years old. I'm in shape. I'm running marathons, and I don't need to have that vaccine. And our policy at the People's Party of Canada, we believe in freedom of choice, and people must be free and responsible. And we don't want any Canadians to be obliged to take a vaccine. So that would be an important debate. I think the next phase of all that COVID debate will be the question of vaccine, because I think we will succeed to end the lockdowns and the curfew in Quebec. But after that, the big debate is on vaccine, and we must fight against mandatory vaccine in this country.
Let me post that to Randy as well, because we keep getting such mixed messages from the Prime Minister saying, "Oh my goodness, we wouldn't possibly consider that," and then the next step he says, "Well, maybe we should consider that." And they've been polling like mad ever since the beginning to ask if people should have a mandatory vaccine or there should be vaccine passports. So I have to say that I wonder if the pollsters are guiding public opinion as opposed to reflecting the actual sentiment, because I don't even know why they'd be asking that in the first place. But give me your sense. What's going on here? Are they? I know everything was sort of geared towards keeping everybody from traveling during the spring break, but is that what they're trying to do? Is to prevent us from seeing families at Easter and then they'll ease up, or is it we've got to keep the fear campaign going so that we can bully and pressure and ostracize people who don't want to get vaccinated? What's happening here? What's the politics?
Well, listen, from what I see, Danielle, I would say that we will be unless people vigorously assert themselves, we're going to see ourselves in lockdowns for not months, but more additional years. This is not, there's no indication that I see that there's any desire by any government, certainly not in central Canada anyway, to let up on lockdowns or to let up on controls. And we're seeing this from public health, that these variants and third waves are all more dangerous, so they're saying, even though the evidence suggests otherwise. We had the UK health minister back a month ago saying that he expects that the lockdowns will still be in place in the UK until the spring of 2022. So, I'd love to be optimistic and hope that we get the lockdowns removed by Easter. I think we may see some short-term alleviation to try to quell the increasing protests. But I'm very confident saying the more that we obey, the more that we comply with these lockdown measures, the longer they're going to last. There will be no incentive or motivation for our governments to quell the fear in the mob, and no incentive or motivation not to take advantage of the fear that they're instilling in the mob. So I see this politically for a great number of political parties and political leaders, that they're quite happy to keep this state of fear in play. And certainly public health and big pharma and big tech, they're all willing to see this keep in play. I would say the mainstream media enjoys the lockdown measures. They've been benefiting handsomely as well. So I think there's just too many people benefiting and who want to keep these restrictions on our freedoms in place. And I would go along with Paul and Maxime's comments. The vaccines are the key to this. That's one of the keys that the government is looking at. But they themselves have even said that you will continue to have to wear a mask. There will have to be continued restrictions, even if you have the vaccine. The vaccine is not a cure. It's one additional way that they're going to keep this high in the conscience level of the public, because they're even stating that you will have to have yearly vaccines for various variants that are coming out. So you can see that this is a permanent and perpetual pandemic that we have created for ourselves. And like, as Paul said, we have to start protecting the freedom and the sovereignty of the individual, that I am the one who decides what gets injected in my body, not some health bureaucrat. And we have to ensure, because we've seen it already here in Ontario, many people are being fired or being prevented from continuing to work if they haven't been vaccinated. We're seeing many people getting fired and let go from work because they have a medical disability that prevents them from wearing a mask. So our governments are allowing corporate Canada and small business to run roughshod over the freedoms of everybody. And we need to start going back to basics as elected representatives, that are first and foremost, our job is to protect the freedoms of individuals and uphold our Constitution, not instill fear into the population.
Well, Randy, you've just terrified me with that statement. So let me see if one of the other panelists has a more optimistic view of what's going on. I've got a number of people who, and I want Drew for you to go next to see whether you agree with what Randy has said, and Maxime. Maxime says, watch for it. Mandatory vaccination is coming. Randy says the same thing, and people are going to get fired from their jobs if they refuse to get vaccinated. He thinks the mask mandates and the restrictions are going to go on for years. I've got people saying, why don't you call this what it is, the Great Reset? But you know what? I never thought that our Premier, Jason Kenney, subscribed to Klaus Schwab's view that we have to use this pandemic as an excuse to transition away from fossil fuels and to change our entire society and get rid of free enterprise capitalism. So I'm perplexed. I mean, if anybody loved freedom, if I was to point to a politician who I thought loved freedom more than any others, I would have pointed to Jason Kenney. This is why it's a disconnect for me. I don't understand, because I understand the theories about why some of the more left-wing authoritarian politicians want to do this. I don't understand why freedom-loving conservative politician would want to do this. So fill in the blanks for us, Drew. Is this going to be a perma lockdown?
I don't believe so, but Danielle, this is why joining the anti-lockdown caucus for me was so crucial. Back to the stated main goal, to review government's policy and approach to the lockdown and the virus and all that's happened. We have a lot of work ahead of us. The Western Standard and you do as well. And Albertans and Canadians, we have to get involved and we have to make sure these things happen. 2 years or so ago, I started a little bit of a quest to help develop a constitution for Alberta in writing. I guess technically we have one that's the jurisprudence and all a whole bunch of older laws and stuff, but we need a constitution to protect individuals and families from the overreach of government is one example, and to help define our culture. Premier Kenney has stated that he is not going to make vaccinations mandatory. Of course, there's other things that can happen with corporate policy and those kind of things. But again, the Great Reset is moving everything to the left. But I'm hoping that that many of us realize that this is also an opportunity to make things more free, to focus more on free enterprise, families, and self-reliance, trusting each other, and those kind of things. There's government got so big so quick. Government stepped into so many areas, and at times we haven't reviewed it and we haven't looked at the effectiveness. And we're going to pay the price for this down the road. There's no doubt. So again, the anti-lockdown caucus, every single Albertan that's interested needs to get involved, needs to make things happen, and needs to be heard. And the premier's accountable. There's an election every 4 years. I'm accountable the same way. There's an opportunity for that to happen. What the future brings, I don't know, but when I go to Medicine Hat and I see it around other parts of Alberta, people that have been complying fairly good for 13 months, still wearing their face masks. Although I don't know too many that give their right name and phone number when they go to a restaurant, but that's a whole nother story. And they want to focus on getting this behind us, protecting those that were truly vulnerable, and a new direction where we, in a democracy where we are rewarded for self-reliance, for taking care of those that need it. The conservative values, I like to fall back to truth and charity. Let's get the real truth about this out over the next little while. Let's give everyone a chance to have an honest say. And as always, we'll take care of each other.
Let me put it to you, Paul. Do you think that the politicians, regardless of political stripe, are all angling to find a way to make this last forever? Or do you think that they are genuinely looking for a window where they can open up and reduce restrictions?
Well, I don't think that I know too many. They're looking for a window. They're looking for excuses to hold it down. This is like deficit spending. They haven't paid the consequences. And again, Drew, I'm going to give the invitation to you. I wrote to all the UCP MLAs before, but we need 20 of you, 23 of you to say end the lockdowns. We're not going to sit in caucus. We'll go sit as independents until the province-wide lockdowns are done. And again, make the amendments to recall so we can actually hold people accountable, not in 2 more years, but tomorrow, and start collecting signatures where 50% plus one of the number of last voters is credible and can get it for 120 days. But we're begging, the UCP MLAs need to stand up. Those that know that it's wrong, join this and then step outside, take away the majority government from Jason Kenney and say no more. We're going to protect Alberta's freedoms. We're going to protect businesses. We're going to protect those religious freedoms. We're going to allow people to exercise their own due diligence and be responsible for their health, their wellness, and for their safety. It's not government's job. Government's job is to protect the individual and to make sure there's a level playing field. And no, we need those elected individuals to step forward and say no more, because the rest of us, all we can do is go to rallies, sign petitions, and then that's not good enough when you don't have accountability through recall. And Jason Kenney's recall bill is just it's an insult to Albertans.
All right, we'll get Drew to respond to that, but I want to do one last round going east to west, starting off with Maxime Bernier and maybe giving us the federal perspective. We know what we want to see happen, but so many of us don't know what is the most effective way to make a difference. I mean, what I'm observing with these rallies that are occurring is that the media is zeroing in on the one wingnut who has a racist sign or a racist banner or holding a tiki torch, and then they're trying to paint everybody there as a pack of racists. And so people are saying, ooh, I don't know that I want to go to those protests. You fill out a poll result, but does it make any difference? You call your MLA or your MP, they don't respond to you. So Maxime, what do you think needs to be done? What is the tangible way that any one of us can press the case?
First of all, I think we all know that if you take for granted your freedom, you will lose it. And we must not do that anymore. And I think we did that in the past. So we must act. We must be active. I know that, it maybe you think that it won't be efficient. But if you go to a rally, to a protest, and more people would be out there, the better it would be. I'm asking Canadians to speak to their friends, to their colleagues about what they think and acting. That's why I'm part of that Freedom Caucus, and it's so important for us. It's important that you express your point of view. You try to have debate and discussion with your friends about all that. And I like to be optimistic about that. But if we don't take our freedom personally and fight for our freedom, we may have lockdowns for a long time. So and the data are on our side. We have the medical experts that are saying the same thing that we are saying. We must be out there. We must speak. I know, Danielle, that if you call your member of parliament, maybe he won't react. But if a lot of people,
I'm sure that was going to be. Do we have one? Darn it! If a lot of, I think what he was going to say is if a lot of people act at once, then
they will question their premier or their prime minister. We must be out there and do what we have to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Maxime Bernier. I appreciate you being with us today. Randy Hillier, what practically can people do? Like, you're putting your money where your mouth is. You've been arrested. You've got fines and potential jail time facing you. Is that I mean, do you recommend that route, or are you regretting that you've taken it that far? I think. Why don't you tell us what happened? Why is it that you've got a court date and a potential for a year in jail and $100,000 fine?
Well, I tried for about 10 months to provoke the government to arrest me, Danielle. And eventually I was successful at the end of November last year. And the charge that I'm facing is a potential $100,000 fine and up to a year in jail. And no, I don't regret it. The only thing I regret is I still haven't been able to have my day in court. But I'm going to get there, because I know when I get in court, I will defeat the government and the courts will nullify these charges. And that's something that everybody should see. We saw it out in Alberta, where Kenny withdrew about 1,500 charges a week or two ago. All the charges in Ontario, none of them have been allowed to come to court yet, because the government knows that these laws will be nullified, and they're obstructing having these charges and matters actually heard. But I'm going to say a couple things. Of course, it's always important for people to contact their elected representatives, and I mean that at every level, right from our municipal councillors and mayors through MLAs and MPPs and up to federal members. But let's also not forget the public health units, and let's not forget our school boards, because there's a lot of tragedy being caused by those two specific levels of government as well. But a lot of people know that I'm involved. I have the nomorlockdowns.ca site, and we're distributing lawn signs across Ontario. We've put out over 20,000 lawn signs now. Next week, we're putting up electronic billboards in southern Ontario. We've developed volunteer teams in many of the local communities to deliver postcards in people's mailboxes to circumvent the mainstream media. We have postcards that are facts versus fears that we're dropping off in people's mailboxes. There's many things that people can do, but most importantly, and what you can do, of course, has to be consistent with your own abilities, your own circumstances, your own capacity. But you have to know this: as long as you're complying with dishonest and unjust laws, that dishonest and unjust law will remain. Right? As long as there's compliance, we are going to have a problem. Hopefully we will get to the point soon. But people have to assert ownership of their freedoms. And the best and only person that can do that is yourself. When you get up in the morning and you want to know who's going to do something to protect your freedoms and to get our country back out of this very dark and dangerous path, is you have to look in the mirror and that's the person who is going to do it. And I would really encourage people, take off the mask. If you don't believe that it's effective, if you believe the science, I did a poll online, Danielle, and I put out a poll. Are you wearing the mask because you're fearful of the virus or because you're fearful of being shamed in public? And 90% of the people said they were wearing the mask because they were fearful of other people's judgment. Only 10% actually feared the virus. So people need to assert that they are free individuals. And when they do that, this whole fakery, exaggeration of our response to COVID will come to an end. But I don't think it'll happen until we make it happen.
Well, Randy, I've got a lot of people saying, bravo, you're a hero. You were the first. You've really stepped up. And thank you for coordinating with all of the other like minds to put the organization together. We appreciate your work on that. And so no more lockdowns.ca if you want to check that out. Let me go to Paul Hinman now. And Paul, what's your practical advice for people? How should people be acting? What should people be doing? How do you make a difference?
Well, first of all, thanks, Danielle, for hosting us tonight. Thanks, Randy, for creating the Liberty Caucus. And that's really what it's about, personal independence. I remember when I was young, I was so excited to turn 16 and get my driver's license and have some independence to move around. When I was 18 and became an adult and personally responsible for my actions and could do that, is great. You know, freedom and independence is what has made the world as great as it is where we see it. And we've lost our freedom. We've lost our independence. Alberta, Premier Kenney needs to be taking all the steps necessary for us to become an independent nation. We should be having and collecting our own taxes and the federal taxes here. We should have our own police force. We should have our own Alberta pension plan. We have our own environmental act, our own immigration policy. All those things need to be taken now, and we need to have the people. My invitation and encouragement is to go to our website, wildrose.party, and to join up. If you want to send a message to Premier Kenney, you want to send a message to Trudeau, join wildrose.party and become a member, make some donations. They see that every quarter, what the numbers are doing. And that's the best message I think that you can send to them. But the people, as Randy has said, as Maxine says, we need to stand up. And my biggest fear is we need to stand up and against those corporations and start punishing them for saying, if you don't have the vaccination, if you don't do these things, we're taking away your freedom, your choice on an experimental vaccination that we don't know whether it's going to work or not. I've talked to doctors that are working in senior care facilities. They've all received the double shots. They're all still wearing masks. They still can't have people come in. There is no end to this unless we stop and say no more. The lockdowns need to end, rip the bandage off, allow people to exercise their own personal independence, look after their wellness, and it's not the government's job. The government job is to protect our independence, our freedoms, not to strip them away and say that we're not capable of making those decisions. So stand up, speak out, otherwise this won't end. And again, the best thing that we have right now because of our current provincial government is recall in 2023. They need to be fired and sent out of here and go live in your own prisons, but don't tell us that we have to live in yours.
All right. Thank you for that, Paul Hinman. So as he said, they do look at the poll results and the horse race question and the fundraising. And so that's another way to send a message. I've got Melissa saying you really do need to give extra credit to Drew Barnes because he is sitting in a caucus, he's speaking out, and he's got the toughest position of all in trying to bridge that divide from where the Liberty Caucus wants to be, but still be a constructive member of caucus. So we are so grateful for you, Drew, that you are fighting the fight from within. Tell us what would be influential on your colleagues. What is it that your colleagues need to hear from their constituents to get them to be as brave as you and Angela Pitt have been in stepping up, saying, even if it's just a regional approach, so that we have some measure of hope we can look forward to. What is it that we need to do to help some of your other colleagues make that decision?
Well, thank you, Danielle. It's exactly that. It's speak up. When the government of Alberta didn't move fully into step 2 about 2 or 3 weeks ago, you may recall that we were on the front page of the Calgary Sun, the six-pack. There was 6 of us that stepped up and asked Premier Kenney and the government of Alberta to move more to what was promised when they originally put out the steps. And a week later they did. Today, one of my colleagues from Northern Alberta stood up and asked for a regional approach in the legislature. Another one was Monday or Tuesday of this week. Danielle, it always starts with the same. They've heard from their constituents. Their constituents have told them that this is what they wanted, and they've expressed support and they've expressed concern. Other Canadians, other Albertans are stepping up. I've been contacted by 3 or 4 that are starting or looking at starting a class action lawsuit. There's many pros and cons of that, but that is one of our free and democratic rights. So by all means, push back where you can, make it happen. And let's not forget that this isn't just a one election thing. This needs to be a movement. This needs to be part of your family life, your kitchen table talk. Some families have that great opportunity to talk about politics and current affairs and make things happen, but not everybody has the same level of interest. And I look at the left in my 10 years in politics. They've marginalized so many things about politics, and they've made it hard to speak up at times because sometimes it becomes about the person rather than the issue, those kind of things. What one of my challenges is, like I've had some people say to me, well, if that business person has a different view from me politically, should I support them? And my feeling is yes. I mean, business is separate from politics. But you should also have that same ability as that business person to get involved, to post somewhere what you're thinking. At the end of the day, a democratic system is one vote for everybody, and a volunteer knocking on doors is probably more valuable than somebody that gives you $1,000. There's many ways to make these things happen, and we're again back to this. What might be the silver lining of the most difficult of times is this hopefully will wake up all of us to get more involved, to focus more on smaller government, free enterprise, and families. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Drew. And thanks again for you and your colleagues who are really trying to press from within, because I know that is really difficult. And you know what, to give the Premier credit, he hasn't booted you out of caucus, and that seems to be what happens in other jurisdictions. So just keep on pressing, guys. I must tell you, and I told the Premier this is also, and since I went off the air, I'm back to the rules that were in place last summer. I have a cohort of 10 people. I'll wear my mask when I'm serving tables, and when I'm within 6 feet of each other, I'll wear them when I go into retail shops and grocery shops. But I'm sorry, like I'm seeing my parents and I'm seeing the loved ones in my life. So I just want you to know, Drew, that there's a lot of civil disobedience going on out there, because when the rules don't make sense, people don't follow them. So I hope you take that back to your caucus and your Premier. Let me hand it off back to Derek Fildebrandt. I'm delighted that he was able to give us all this opportunity to have this conversation. It was Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada. It was Randy Hillier, who is an MPP independent in Ontario. Paul Hinman, of course, leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party, and Drew Barnes, who represents Medicine Hat Cyprus in the provincial legislature under the UCP. And I think that's it for me. I don't know that we've got any more of these uncensored discussions planned. I've kind of said my piece. I wanted you to see the kind of information that I felt you needed to hear and that I wanted to bring to you. And so I'm grateful to Derek Fildebrandt and the Western Standard for giving us this opportunity to be together to have these discussions, because they're very, very important. Derek, let me hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Danielle. You've done a fantastic job both tonight and in the whole series that you've conducted with the Danielle Smith Uncensored series. This is the last one we had scheduled. I know you and I kind of mapped out kind of a broad range here of all the uncensored topics we want. Well, this was all the uncensored COVID topics. I think there are a few others that I'll see if I won't put you on the spot here, but I have every intention of using every bit of leverage at my disposal to try and get you to do a few more. I'm sure our viewers would be very grateful if you did. But I won't lean on you anymore, just in case you say no, because that'd be embarrassing. So thank you so much. You've done a fantastic job with the entire series, but there's a lot more that we want to cover. Remember, Corey Morgan, a lot of you know who he is. He's been doing some ad hoc shows with us. You can watch Corey Morgan every Monday and Tuesday from 10 to 12 Mountain Standard Time, the Corey Morgan Show. It'll be a regular daily radio style talk show where you can be interactive, ask questions, have your part of it. I want to thank our guest today, Drew Barnes, my former colleague when I was in the Wild Rose, who's sitting with the UCP. One of the good guys. There are a few in there. I don't agree with much of what the government is doing now, but there are some good ones in there. I just, from the comments, someone asked if the whole six-pack were all Wild Rosers. 5 of the six-pack are from the former Wild Rose, and the one who was not, Michaela Glasgow, used to work for a Wild Rose MLA by the name of Drew Barnes. And she's from, and she represents Brooks. And if I might say, that was a pretty good half of my riding when I was in politics. Maxime Bernier from the People's Party of Canada. Thanks so much for joining us. Always eloquent as always. You're still the Quebecer from Alberta, still always welcome out in our neck of the woods. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. And Randy Hillier, I've known Randy for a very long time before he was in politics. I went to university with one of his sons, Russell, good friend of mine, who lives in Calgary now here. Our families actually go way back between my the maternal side of my family and the Hilliers. So fantastic to have you. And Paul Hindman, if you ever need a North Star in politics to know if if you're on the right and you need to know if you're going in the same direction, give Paul a call. He's always seems to be marching in the right direction. And whenever I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, I'd give him a call. So I think everyone should try to check where they're going and look to him for advice. I'd advise friends in the UCP to maybe give Paul a call if they don't want him to be premier. So, well, thank you all very much. I do want to just note again, today's show was sponsored by Kyron's Way. Kyron's Way is a certified natural nutritionist engaging in heart math interventions and practitioner, emotional health skills counselor who offers affordable and educational-based approaches to address a variety of emotional health-related stress and anxiety issues. Get your free nutritional and stress assessment at kyronsway.com. That's KYRONSWAY. Yes, that is a difficult word to spell. It took me a long time to figure out just how to pronounce it. Again, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Don't like bailout media, don't think that the press should be working for the government. Well, then open your wallets for $10 a month or less if you buy an annual membership. Try it free for 15 days. Support bailout-free media, support Western media. If you don't like us, support someone else. Just make sure you're supporting media outlets that aren't getting their salaries paid by Justin Trudeau. Well, thank you all again very much. Danielle, again, for hosting. Real pleasure. Fantastic show. Have a good evening. God bless.
Good night, all.
Very much, and take care, everybody. Keep up the fight.